This is Swarfcast. I'm Noah Graff. I am very honored to be with Mike Topolewski Jr., Vice President of Sales and Operations at Perigee Manufacturing Company in Michigan. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Good afternoon, Noah. How are you?
I'm very good now that I'm talking to you. We've known Mike and his company a little while at Graf Pinkert, and they run screw machines, a lot of Acmes, and I'm going to let him explain more of what they do. And we're going to delve into being a defense supplier today. This is something that I've actually been quite intrigued with, and we haven't covered before. So first, just to get started, please tell everybody what Perigee Manufacturing is. Tell us just a brief overview, what you guys make, a little bit of history.
Yeah, so established 1965 by my grandfather, Patrick Topolewski. We are a third generation business. I'm fourth generation in the industry. My great grandfather had a fairly large fastener manufacturing operations that started in the late teens, early 20s, 1920s. And so a fair amount of our family was employed in those operations. And then World War II happened, the company shut down. There were, I believe, my great grandfather had seven sons and a daughter. They all came back from the war, and they started another company. So the first one was Top Screw and Nut. The second one is Popular and Special, and that went until the 60s. And then my great grandfather passed away, and all of his sons got involved in other businesses, 3 or 4 of which were in the fastener or manufacturing industry. And my grandfather, Patrick, in the 1960s started Perigee in a very small, 3,000 square foot facility with a Model G Gridley and probably a 2 1/4 4-spindle and a couple other pieces of equipment. And we've grown from there. So now we have over 20 multi-spindles, Acme Gridleys. We have 8 CNC turning centers and lathes, and a whole bunch of secondary equipment in our operations. We about 27,000 square feet of our facility.
Nice. So you're still running a lot of Acmes. It's still an important part of your business.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, we're growing. Our Acme count is growing. We've certainly upgraded and scrapped some of the older ones and been able to upgrade with attachments and newer machines and such. And
Mike was flirting with some interesting 1-inches we had recently. He was petting the merchandise, and for one reason or another, they had to hold them.
Yeah, that
right
was
there.
tempting. We just acquired 2 Miano twin spindle, twin turret turning centers that.
Oh, you don't need those. You need some good old fashioned cast
I'm a
iron.
proponent of that, certainly, and there are more in our future. We are on a growth phase here.
Those are some sexy machines. Those Miano twin turret machines.
Nice.
They're nice. Okay, cool. So, tell us, what are some of the sectors that you make stuff for, and what are some of the exact parts? So you make fasteners.
Yeah. So fasteners are in everything, right? Fasteners, nuts and bolts hold the world together. We certainly don't just make nuts and bolts, but there are automotive aftermarket, heavy truck, defense, aerospace, marine, construction, agricultural, oil and gas, and we serve all of those markets to certain extents. But but again, these components are in everything. So we're fortunate in that sense to have a pretty broad base in our customers of customers. So we're not beholden to one particular industry, although we have uh, we have our preferences in what we do, but certainly it served us well over the years. Ironically enough, we're located in Detroit, Michigan, and historically we haven't done a whole lot of direct automotive work. Uh,
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because that can be some real cutthroat stuff, and it seems like some of our customers have tried to get away from that too.
yeah,
Um, so, what percentage of your business is
a small
automotive?
amount, you know, 10, 15%. It, it can be a
That
race to
sounds
the
good.
bottom. My grandfather
Right.
was uh, pretty wise in dealing with that and not getting heavily involved in the auto industry. It seems to be a bit of feast or famine, and the relationships between the tier ones and the tier twos and tier threes is not exactly one that is, uh, it's not necessarily a long term. It's not mutually beneficial long term, or it can devolve. It can devolve into, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that stinks.
so yes, we do have exposure to that to the automotive, but we have exposure to many other.
Is it hard to compete with Chinese sources with like making the
Sure,
more simple
sure.
fasteners?
Most of those were offshored years ago, and only recently have we seen a reshoring effort, and we've certainly seen it as well. Parts coming back. I think you know there's a there's some models out there that it's not just the purchase price. You have to, you got logistics, and we certainly know what the cost
Of
of
course.
logistics, what has happened over these pandemic years, and if you could even get components over, or if they ended up in the ocean. So, customers have realized that and have come back and presented some opportunities, and the cost might be close, or maybe the domestic source is a bit higher, but there's a little more certainty, or there should be a lot more certainty in terms of uh, the source of supply, the relationship, which we're very big in, and quality. So, that dynamic has changed, and the industry, and we have seen some efforts to reshore some of these components that left.
Interesting. Um, okay, so this is interesting that you've got uh, some background in a lot of sectors, and now I want to delve into being a defense supplier because I just think, supplying to the government, our government is pretty interesting. I suppose every government is interesting, but you have this interesting combination of public sector and private sector um, that, yeah, it makes for an interesting chemistry. So let's just take it from the beginning. You've been doing some defense contracting for what, 20 years?
Directly for 20 years, indirectly for many more, which is a different, and I can talk about that. But yes, we've been awarded
Okay,
governments from the DoD or the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, for over 20 years.
interesting. So, first, what got that started? Why, how did you? My assumption is you were presented with a certain opportunity, and then, and that was the beginning of it. Or had it been something where you were going, damn, I heard those defense contractors, those are lucrative. I got to get me in on that.
It was a bit of a natural progression for the company. Again, because fasteners and turn components are in everything, many of the same or similar fasteners are in defense components, vehicles, aircraft. Uh, you know, just right from the very top, the United States government's budget, they spend $6 trillion I believe those are 2022 numbers. It's probably higher than that. Certainly every year it goes up. Tremendous spending power. Okay, the DoD budget, I believe, for fiscal year 2023 is on the order of $800 billion. It's a staggering amount of money.
And when they say they're decreasing spending, all they mean is they're decreasing the amount of
That that
increase,
that is
correct?
the typical Washington speak. Yeah. So if they're moaning about cuts, yes, it's typically a reduction in the rate of increase that's already either baked in or appropriated, which is
Wow, that is it's such BS. They're trying, they're totally fooling everybody. They're making everybody think, oh, we were spending 800,000 or 800 billion before, and now we're only spending 700. But no, it might mean we're spending 850 rather than increasing the 900. I
yeah,
thought that's so fascinating.
it's a little sleight of hand, I guess.
Yeah, sleight of hand or sleight of language. So, okay, so it was a natural progression because there's a lot of things that have fasteners in it, maybe like vehicles, Humvees, airplanes. Um, so, what was the first thing? What was the catalyst that got you to start doing
So I
this?
mentioned we had done indirect prior to being certified as a defense contractor, and so we have been making defense components for many years, almost for our full existence, 55 plus years. Uh, we we became aware of the opportunity to become a direct defense contractor, which is can be a very daunting path. It's not straightforward, so to speak. There are multiple steps and multiple departments you have to go through to get certified, so to speak, to do defense work. Now, the one caveat I'll say is, we're a fastener, precision turn component manufacturer. The way that we do business, it can be very different than a service provider to the Department of Defense or to another agency. So some of these things that are relevant to us in our industry certainly won't apply to other defense or government contractors. It's a very it can be a very circuitous path doing business with the government, and it is, as I said, it's very daunting. So it was a bit of a natural progression from indirect, seeing the opportunity indirect, getting certified, getting the appropriate things in place, which really had already been in place.
What were you indirectly supplying? I mean, it was fasteners, but to what were the fasteners going
Really the
into?
same end items that we are right now. It just would go through uh, an
An
intermediary, a distributor,
intermediary.
a certified distributor, or another entity, and we still do that. We still certainly supply. Um,
Why would you want to do that rather than go directly and get a
that's a
better
great
margin?
question.
Why give something to somebody
Yeah,
else
no, it's a very good question.
when you can just take all the pie?
Well,
Because those guys find you the contracts. Is that part of the
you
reason
know,
why?
the value added of a distribution company, we're a manufacturing company. Although I consider ourselves a stocking manufacturer, we certainly do stock and release many items. Um, we are a manufacturer through and through. And, uh, you know, the distribution houses are very good. They have relationships, they've got contacts, and we certainly do too. Uh, they're not mutually exclusive. Okay, um, doing direct work with the DLA or DoD, isn't necessarily exclusive of the work we do with distributors. That has continued and it's even grown. So I think it's just
Okay.
a value added proposition. It's something that can be provided. Our ability to inventory and stock items is probably not certainly not as great as a larger distributor who has a better handle and maybe has other buyers for those same
Okay.
components.
So just I mean, just to understand exactly what you're talking about, and probably most of the people listening to this do understand, these distributors, these guys stock a bunch of parts. They have a huge building with inventory where they're stocking the
Exactly.
stuff.
Yes. And it's
I see. I see.
they're doing so based on several factors, demand and such, and they have economies of scale that we may not have. So we're a manufacturer, and we're good at what we do, but there's certainly a need and a value for distribution. I would We have very good relationships with
Okay.
distributors, so it's not all or nothing, so to speak.
Okay. Well, how do you get certified? So you want to maybe get past this distributor and get to deal directly. Um, is it something kind of like getting, some other ISO for medical or aerospace, or is there some other kind of thing that this entails?
It's definitely a process. It's a multi-step process. First steps are getting registered with the federal government, getting issued a code, a cage code, so to speak, and that is done uh, via certain. There's a process to that. So you get.
What is a cage code?
If I believe the acronym stands for Corporate and Government Entity, CAGE.
Okay.
Our cage is 1X, 4X, 7. That is assigned to our company. That stays with our company. And when you bid on contracts and you are awarded contracts, that is public record. That information is available to the public. It's available to anybody to see which entity was awarded what. And so if that
And normally, if you're normally some other kind of contract, some other sector, this is just that's confidential
exactly,
or
which is a
could
big
be.
difference, right? That is it's an interesting wrinkle to the procurement.
That's interesting because you'd think the government would be all about
You
being
would think.
secretive. Um, so you got this certification about 20 years ago, and tell me how long did it take? And would you say it was difficult? It was complicated, a lot of bureaucracy.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily difficult. It was a long process. It was a multi-step process. So, there's quite a bit of paperwork and checking, background checking. Are we a viable corporation? Are there any possible debarment? Verification of that. And then at that time, this was the early 2000s. We had a visit from the local DCMA, Defense Contract Management Agency branch, and their job is to administer contracts and do verification. So they came in and did a full, multiple full audits of our company. We had already been, ISO certified and had various certifications, uh, but theirs is different.
Is that important to have before you even get theirs, or do they not
They
look at that?
do. ISO 9001, for instance, is a big basis of their requirements.
Which one is ISO
Yeah,
9000?
that's
I always forget
ISO
what
9001
they are.
general certification for manufacturing. It can apply to many different manufacturing or other entities. We're also AS 9100 certified, which is aerospace. That's a different thing altogether. But the government's is separate. They
And
have their own.
and do you have to be regular aerospace certified in order to do aerospace for the government?
That depends. So quite a few of the items procured in the defense procurement channels end up in an aerospace application. That is different than an end user OEM aerospace like Boeing or Airbus or what have you. So sometimes we don't have good visibility on that. That's a difficult question to answer, but they are separate. The government does procure things for helicopters and aircraft, which we supply. We supply flight and critical fasteners, that are safety critical. Okay.
And on things like that, I suppose this may be the same for commercial. Are there certain components where it has to come from the United
Yeah.
States?
So there are several iterations of Buy America Act uh, that apply, and this is on a contract basis. So again, a textile manufacturer supplying textiles to the government, there are different rules in place for them as compared to us
Right.
supplying
Okay.
a uh, a slotted, a castellated nut that goes into a helicopter that holds the you know the blades onto the aircraft, or onto the helicopter. So it really depends the procurement channel. Um, there's some wrinkles there, so to speak, right?
You were saying when we were preparing for this that if you were to do this now, there might be a little it might be a little smoother if you use something called a P-TAC. Can you
Sure,
explain that?
sure. So there are agencies set up, and I believe they're backed by the federal or state government to assist contractors with existing contracts. So they're an existing defense contractor. They may have an issue with a contract. These contracts are very, very long. They're not 1 or 2 pages. There are a lot of what they call flow down clauses that apply.
I'm assuming you hired somebody when you did this.
Uh, we've grown, and we've hired people and added people. We've learned a lot as we've done this business, and I think that's the main thing. The main takeaway is it is a learning process. The government is so big, and there is a tremendous bureaucracy that
All right.
these PTACs, for instance, can be a very helpful resource.
But you don't use them. You have your
We
own
haven't
internal people.
had the need to use them, but they are available if we needed to. We,
So maybe if it was a new job and there just seemed to be a lot of rigmarole, you might
sure,
tap that
sure, and it's
resource.
available, and I believe it's nationwide. So the PTAC is there to assist the contractor in the process.
Interesting. Okay, so you've gotten certified, you've gone through some of the rigmarole. Now I want to know some of the ins and outs. Uh, you want to get a job, and you can give an example of one. I want to know what the process is like, and I'd like to know a little comparison to um, just bidding on a job in the private sector.
Okay.
So give me an example of, so I mean, you've given me an example of some of the things you do some aerospace, maybe some automotive for them. You don't do any weapons for them, do you? Any, not weapons, but gun parts,
Again,
or?
fasteners are in firearms and such.
But you know what the stuff's going into, or do they just say I need a certain amount of nuts, and then they don't tell you?
It depends. It depends. Sometimes it's just
Okay, so sometimes it's not
that's
so
true. Yeah, it's
transparent.
true. And there are certain requirements and additional clearances that are needed to uh, look at the drawing and the data set. There are certain rights guards programs in place. So just because someone has gone through the gauntlet of becoming, getting a cage code and bidding on government work and getting contracts, that doesn't necessarily mean that uh, they have visibility in all this. And we've had to do that. We've had to get these additional certifications. So it does. We don't always know the end use of the item. Many times we do, um, but there are many times we don't.
How do you feel about that? Do you wish you knew all the time? Do you really
Yes,
don't care as
it's
long as
it's
it's
interesting. I do think about that, and we've made millions of fasteners and turned components, and I can't sit here and tell you I know where everyone has gone. Uh, my grandfather had a saying. He did not have an intention to go into business to put a nut on every bolt, because we were a predominant nut manufacturer, and that still rings true. But it is interesting, and we make some pretty cool, interesting things that go into very critical end uses within the military and other industries, but we don't always know. And that's not necessarily important from a manufacturing or quality standpoint. What is important is knowing the contract requirements. It's critical. These flow down clauses that do apply. What's important is knowing the part requirements, okay, and then the supplementary requirements. Packaging. These parts have to be packaged and RFID barcoded and sent in certain with certain packaging requirements to the various depots in the United States, and sometimes, through foreign military sales to other friendly nations. So we don't always know. Uh,
Do they have guys coming in and looking over your shoulder?
who's that?
Does the Gov send in people that are looking over your shoulder?
Yeah. Because... So depending on the contract, it can be administered by the local DCMA office, Defense Contract Management Agency, and so they will come in and they have the right to come in at any time and review that contract and ensure that.
Do they do like a turn test on your parts?
They've done just about everything. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So they are an entity that.
Which is good. I'm glad that they're.
Well, as a taxpayer, I would agree. These are taxpayer dollars, and as a taxpayer, I want to make sure it's being spent wisely, and we want to make sure.
Right, not some bozo making the parts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Protecting the warfighter is important, and making critical components on aircraft and vehicles that could result, their failure that could result in loss of life, we take very seriously. So I am happy that certain barriers are in place, certain verifications and audits are in place to ensure that the product conforms to what the military.
How do the auditors from that compare to some of the private sector people, or say it? I bet you I'm guessing automotive people are some of the most annoying.
It's a mixed bag. We've had quite.
Mm-hmm. Well, it probably depends on the part.
It does, and the individual auditor. Some of the DCMA auditors have come from private, automotive and engineering background. So that information is helpful, and having a working knowledge, the knowledge base in the industry. But it's been a mixed bag of characters and auditors. I wouldn't say entirely different from other industries. It's just different in the process, in the requirements, the clauses, and there's certainly some overlap. They use best practices, as compared to ISO 9001 and TS 16949 or IATF 16949 or AS 9100. So it's different, but it's not entirely different.
What's the difference?
That there are a lot of intricacies. There's similarities in all those standards. Doing work with the Defense Department, as I mentioned, these contracts are much longer. Okay, so.
Right, because that's one of the things I want to just get into soon, just about the contracts and the bidding on it. But go on it before we get to that.
Just by that very nature of being a very long 20, 30, 40-page contract, and that contract could be for a small quantity of parts.
And that's that's more pages than a normal one.
Absolutely, yeah. And that contract has many, many clauses and DFAR clauses and certain requirements that, you talk about cybersecurity and safeguarding data and record keeping, and you name it. There are so many so many different
Yeah.
requirements that are flowed down to the contractor that you really need to have very good working knowledge of these. So I would say that that's a,
Okay.
you know, that's a big process. And again, that contract can be for a small quantity of parts and maybe not even a big dollar amount. So you have to make sure you have the good working knowledge of these requirements. You have to be, fully understand it, and you have to do it in a timely fashion and make sure you're meeting all of those. So that's quite different than from an automotive or a heavy truck or a different end user contract.
All right. So it must mean, for people to do this stuff, it must mean it can be quite interesting. Uh, so, okay, tell me about the bidding process and then the length of the contracts, because that's a little different from some of the other
Yeah.
things, correct?
So
So why don't you do, yeah, combine those two, because that seems like they're
the bidding
intertwined.
process and the length of the contract, is that which yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and all the other details. I'm sure there's a lot of other
Sure. So the
important
bidding
things.
process for us, for our industry, is uh, typically done on a bid board. There are several uh, procurement boards that the government uses to disseminate the solicitations. Okay, and you need to have the credentials and the access to these portals, and so you go in there and you see what the government is looking for, and you review these solicitations, which can be as long or longer than the contract sometimes, and then you enter your bid, via that portal. And there, like I said, there are several of them that are out there, and they're different again depending on the type of commodity that's being purchased. So that's different. We're not, although we do get emails from the various Army, Navy, et cetera, and from the Defense Logistics Agency. Predominantly, it's through bid boards, and we're bidding on uh, contracts that are uh, typically for a discrete number of parts with a specific delivery date requirement. Okay. Now, there are different
Okay.
contracts and different solicitations that
What's an example of a quantity you might have, like a
uh,
range? I mean, obviously you're screw machine people, so you're making a lot
we
for
are,
sure.
and we have 8 CNC machines, and those are running low volumes as well. So one piece, back
Hmm.
in war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, there were times where we were making very small quantities, and they were immediately sent out overseas to the troops. So as few as one, and as many as hundreds of thousands. So it's a full range,
Okay.
uh, and it's just based upon what their needs are.
Okay. Okay. So, it's sort of an automated thing. Somebody's not just calling you on the phone and going, Mike, we're doing a covert mission and we need X for, our secret weapon. Like, I mean, this is more like, there's a computerized system and you're bidding to
Correct.
see.
Yeah. So it's entered that way. So once you enter your bid, you are notified via email or via the portal if you're awarded this business, and you're also notified if you aren't. Again, it's public record, right? So
And it's total guessing game, right? So like, they need 100,000 nuts and you calculate what you can do and your time study or whatever, but you can't really be sure. And this is something that I'm from what I do. I just don't know about. Like you could be quite aggressive, right? And say, hey, I'm going to make 50 cents a part rather than do uh, 10 cents a part, and you don't know whether you're going to make it. You may actually be able to get a really good, uh, a really something really interesting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So again, you can see previous contract history for that particular part. So you have
Oh, okay, that's
you have
helpful.
a general idea of the market value, um, or the maybe not current value, especially through the pandemic and supply chain issues, because cost structures have changed. But you have an idea, and you certainly know you have an idea if you're going to be somewhat competitive. We certainly don't. We're not going to be bidding on there are too many things out there to bid on. You have to be selective, and you have to know what your strengths are, what you're competitive at, and go after that.
Do you sometimes like look at stuff and you've got these Acmes that can crank parts out and you go, ha, I know these been running these on CNC lathes. I'm just going to crush it. Do you see that?
Absolutely. Our company, we've always done that. We typically don't. I wouldn't say always. There are times where we drop parts complete off our screw machines, but I would say a predominance of the parts that we manufacture on our screw machines are not drop complete. They have.
Right, but even when you do that, you could still
Oh,
crush
sure.
something coming from. So, do you run into that quite a bit in these defense contracts?
You look at the previous procurement history, and you start to think, that number looks kind of funky. Is am I missing something? Or
But the only question is some other screw machine guy coming at it at the same time?
you don't know. It's awarded to one entity. You don't know all the other bids that are going on. You don't know the way they're manufacturing it.
Is that any different from bidding on something not with the government?
That part is not. You
Okay.
know, obviously there are the obvious barriers to entry to doing defense work. Getting registered, going through these various steps. Um, Many companies don't have the patience or the wherewithal or the
So
metal.
you're saying there's less, one advantage of it is there's less competition, possibly.
Yes, there is, and for those reasons, but also for uh, the reasons of the length of these contracts and the requirements that are that are forced upon the contractor. Yes, making the parts may be the same whether it's for uh, a defense end use and for an automotive, but again, that contract has many clauses that may have costs associated with them to our
So
company.
what's an example of a clause?
Well, one obvious difference are packaging requirements.
Packaging.
If you're bidding on these contracts, they don't want them just in a box and shipped to the depot. They have to be sometimes individually bagged, and some of these bags are expensive, protected bags, and they have RFID enabled labels and barcodes, and so that's an obvious one. Um, Cybersecurity is another. We are required to have certain cybersecurity measures in place in order to do these to bid on these contracts. There's a tremendous cost with that. Uh,
Yeah.
the administrative cost of digesting and understanding a 30 or 40 page contract can be pretty high. So there over the years there are these examples of the $500 hammer. I don't know if that's the price that was used, but they used it as an example to show that the government is spending a tremendous amount of money for a very basic commodity. And I believe that there's certainly waste, fraud, and abuse and inefficiencies there. That's not my
Right.
argument. But the other side of that is that there are some very real requirements in these contracts that can be very costly to manufacture these parts. So any company that wants to do business with the government has to tread lightly and understand those. And those are barriers to entry. Many companies simply say, "I'm not willing to do this. I'm not willing to retain um, the paperwork, the certifications for the life of the program." In the case of a B-52 bomber, that program started in the early 1950s and it's still going.
Yeah.
You can imagine these costs start to add up. So
See, I picture the government though, and I picture them like just sometimes just being silly and not really having, you know, as you said, several, how many billion? Three trillion?
The federal government budget is over 6 trillion. The Defense Department budget is 800 billion.
Okay,
Either
so
way, it's a lot of money.
they have 800 billion. I can imagine, you know, there being certain things that they're just like, yeah, get me these. And they don't, they may not be quite as crazy about the negotiation as, say, GM. Am I wrong?
Not at all. You're right. There are immediate needs. The previous example I used during the
Oh, so because there's immediate needs, that cuts through some of this nitpicky bargaining over a cent thing because it's like, we need this contract, get this done now.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are times, and they can be very clear about it, where delivery supersedes price. So
Mm-hmm.
in those types of contracts, then that's in play. And so uh, it's a very interesting process. It is different in that sense that price is important, quality is critical, obviously. But if there's an immediate need, they'll supersede that, or I won't say supersede that. It's a second order priority. Price is
So
important.
when they send you the thing and you're bidding on it, is there like a box you check, like, not only I can do it for this price and I can get it to you this time? That's one of the things that you bid on.
Correct. You are bidding on at a
Oh, interesting.
specific unit price and a specific time frame that you will deliver those parts.
Is that the same as the private sector?
Uh, it's similar. These solicitations, the ones that we bid on, typically um, tell you how many days they want the parts. It may or may not be feasible. It could be 5 days, and this could be a 90-day lead time, right? Uh,
Yes.
so it's similar, but they do give you, and there are priorities. There's I believe it's DPAS. There's a priority listing if this is an immediate need due to a priority within the Army or one of the branches. They will raise that up, and the delivery is going to be critical on that.
Tell me, what are your favorite parts of doing the defense and supplier, and your least favorites?
So we make a fair amount of parts that go into various vehicle platforms within the military, and we take pride in supporting and protecting the warfighter if these parts are critical to their safety. And
I think that's pretty cool too. I mean, it gives you a nice sense of purpose knowing that the parts are going towards, protecting our country.
yes, yeah, we take that very seriously, and we take pride in that. And least favorite parts. There are some very challenging parts. I appreciate a challenge, and we certainly do at our company. From a manufacturing standpoint, our capabilities continue to grow. Uh, there's some.
Sounds like the paperwork is one of the more blah, least favorite things.
There you go. I would say paperwork
It's
is
number one.
at the bottom of the barrel.
Anything else that's the bottom of the barrel, or is that's clearly the bottom?
Well, no, I can tell you another positive is that federal government pays very well, and they pay on time. And if they don't, you get interest.
That makes sense. It's just one of the things that would motivate people to do it. Reliability. That makes total sense.
It's critical. It's important, and they pay well. But the defense industrial base in this country is critical to the national security of this country, and they take that very seriously. The relationships are different, right? As a defense contractor to the Department of Defense, as compared to as an automotive supplier to an automotive company. Okay, it's very different. and there has been a lot of talk over the years. Are we, as a country, making sure that the defense industrial base is supported? Obviously, we just went through a pandemic and supply chain issues, and inflation continues. It's been very difficult for a lot of companies to navigate these things. If these defense contractors go away, and especially critical ones, on and they're a sole source provider to the federal government, then we have a real issue. And some of these platforms, for instance, the B-52 and the A-10 Warthog, these are platforms that have gone way back, and many of those contractors are not around anymore. So this is one of the important things that they do, is to ensure, and they can do a better job of it, um, but it's important, right?
Mike, thank you so much. This was really fun, and I really appreciate it. I learned things.
Thank you, Noah. I appreciate it.